So back in 2012, there was this team of psychologists, Richard West, Russell Meserve, and Keith Stanovich.
Right, the blind spot bias study.
Exactly. They ran this study that came to a pretty unsettling conclusion. They were testing this concept of blind spot bias, which is, that human inability to see our own cognitive flaws.
Even though we are, like, perfectly capable of spotting those exact same flaws in someone else from a mile away.
Right. So logically, you would assume that if you're really smart, if you have a lot of cognitive processing power, you'd be way better at spotting your own mental blind spots.
Yeah, you'd think raw intellect acts like a shield against irrationality.
But the study found the exact opposite. Being highly intelligent actually makes you significantly more susceptible to blind spot bias.
Which is just wild. It completely upends how we think about intelligence.
Right.
The data basically shows that being smart doesn't stop you from having irrational beliefs.
Right, it just makes you better at defending them.
Exactly. Your intellect actually becomes a weapon against your own objectivity. Instead of acting like a scientist who's, searching for the truth, your brain acts like a highly paid defense attorney.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Right. Like its only job is to build this bulletproof narrative that justifies whatever terrible decision you just made.
And as you're listening to this deep dive right now, your brain is probably already picturing a coworker or a boss who desperately needs to hear this.
Oh, totally. You're mentally compiling a list of all the smart people you know who make awful choices.
But that automatic projection, that right there is your own blind spot bias, actively trying to convince you that you aren't the problem.
Yeah, it's a very sneaky biological trick.
So welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today is to explore this paradox, like why our brains are so fundamentally wired for self-deception and how we can actually upgrade our decision-making operating system.
And we are pulling from a really massive stack of sources today.
We really are. We're anchoring heavily on Charlie Munger's legendary framework, The Psychology of Human Misjudgment, and we're pairing that with Shane Parrish's highly tactical book, Clear Thinking.
Plus, we're bringing in the heavy hitters for context. We've got Daniel Kahneman's Mechanics of Cognition from Thinking Fast and Slow, Annie Duke's Probability Frameworks in Thinking in Bets,
Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money, and even some first principles logic from Naval Ravikant and Thomas Sowell.
It's a lot, but when you lay all these sources out on the table, a really unified thesis emerges.
Yeah, systemic blind spots and cognitive biases, specifically things like incentive-caused bias and social proof, they are secretly hijacking our lives.
Operating entirely behind the scenes. And the only proven way to neutralize them is by building what Munger calls a rigorous lattice work of mental models.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Because if raw intelligence isn't the shield we thought it was, we really need to understand the invisible hardware running in our brains.
The hardware that makes us so vulnerable in the first place?
Exactly. We have to look at the mechanisms that stop us from even realizing we're making a decision. Shane Parrish dismantles this romanticized idea of what a decision actually is.
Yeah, we have this cinematic view of decisions, like you're sitting at a mahogany boardroom table, drawing up a pros and cons list to choose a college.
Or sitting down with your partner with a spreadsheet to review finances before buying a house.
Right. But Parrish points out that those big macroscopic events are incredibly rare.
The actual trajectory of your life is dictated by thousands of invisible micro moments that we don't even recognize as decisions. He calls them ordinary moments.
And the danger of an ordinary moment is that there's no warning label. Nobody taps you on the shoulder and says, alert, you are entering a critical decision matrix.
Activate rationality. Yeah, no, let's visualize this. Say it's 4:30 p.m. on a Friday. You get a Slack message from a coworker that reads just a little too passive-aggressive about a project you've been grinding on.
We've all been there.
Right. And in that fraction of a second, you do not sit back, stroke your chin, and weigh the geopolitical consequences of your reply.
No, you just react. You feel that heat in your chest, your fingers hit the keyboard, and you snap back with some sarcastic comment.
And suddenly you are pouring gasoline on a fire. You've objectively worsened your working conditions and alienated a colleague without consciously choosing to do any of it.
To understand the neurological mechanics of why you just sent that career-limiting Slack message, we have to look at Kahneman's System 1 and System 2 thinking.
This is the biological autopilot we're constantly fighting, right?
Exactly. System 1 is what Kahneman calls the associative machine. It's fast, it's automatic, it's highly emotional, and it operates completely below your conscious awareness.
So when you read that passive-aggressive message, System 1 just instantly scans your entire biological history.
It does. It cross-references the tone of the message against every time you've ever felt disrespected. It registers your fatigue at 4:30 on a Friday, and it just serves up a fully formed emotional retaliation.
Before your eyes have even finished reading the sentence.
Yes. Now, if System 1 is the impulsive force, System 2 is supposed to be the adult in the room, the conscious, reasoning self.
But Kahneman has this great metaphor for how they interact. Think of System 1 as this hyperactive, incredibly fast junior employee who generates like hundreds of reports a minute.
And System 2 is the tired, overworked CEO sitting in the corner office.
Right. The junior employee runs into the office, hands the CEO a 100-page report regarding that Slack message, slaps a sticky note on the front that says, "They are disrespecting us, we must attack," and just waits.
And here is where the biology betrays us. Kahneman points out that System 2 is inherently biologically lazy.
Because it takes literal, measurable, physical energy to engage it, right?
Exactly. When System 2 boots up to solve a complex problem, your pupils visibly dilate, your muscles tense, your blood pressure rises, your brain just starts rapidly consuming glucose.
And the body hates that. It wants to conserve that caloric energy for basic survival.
So the tired CEO, System 2, rarely bothers to read the 100-page report. It just looks at the sticky note, signs off on it, and lets System 1 hit send.
Kahneman proves just how desperate that CEO is to avoid the work with his famous bat and ball problem. This is such a great mathematical trick.
It perfectly exposes the handover between System 1 and System 2.
Yeah, so the problem goes like this. A bat and a ball together cost a total of $1.10. The bat costs exactly $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost?
And immediately, the associative machine, System 1, screens the answer, 10 cents.
It's so intuitive. It sees the $1.10, it sees the dollar, and it lazily subtracts the two to find a clean pattern.
It feels perfect.
Yeah.
But if we force the tired CEO to actually read the report and do the basic algebra, the whole illusion falls apart.
Right, because if the ball is 10 cents and the bat is $1 more than the ball, the bat would be $1.10.
Which would make the total cost $1.20, not $1.10.
So the actual mathematical answer is that the ball costs 5 cents and the bat costs $1.05.
But what makes this so profound is the data Kahneman actually collected on this. He gave this simple question to students at Harvard, MIT, and Princeton.
And the results were staggering.
Over 50% of them got it wrong. These are people in the highest percentile of cognitive processing power on the planet.
Their System 2 is obviously capable of elementary school algebra.
Absolutely. But they failed because their System 2 just accepted the effortless answer handed up by System 1 without spending the microscopic energy required to verify it.
So if System 1 is driving the car 99% of the time and System 2 is asleep at the wheel, it makes sense that System 1 has these pre-programmed routes it takes when it gets stressed.
Shane Parrish categorizes these routes as defaults. When we face an ordinary moment and lack the space to think, System 1 automatically defaults to one of 4 primitive subroutines.
Right. There's the emotion default, which is what happened with our hypothetical Slack message, just reacting out of pure anger or fear.
Then you have the ego default, which is the sheer refusal to admit you were wrong because it would damage your self-image.
And the social default, that desperate evolutionary urge to conform to the group so you don't get ostracized.
And finally, the inertia default, the brain's preference to keep things exactly the way they are, because change requires caloric effort.
These defaults are basically biological shortcuts. They evolved to keep us alive in a primitive environment where speed was way more important than accuracy.
Yeah, if you hear a rustle in the bushes on the savannah, the emotion default of fear makes you run. If you pause to engage System 2 and calculate wind speed, you'd be eaten.
Okay, but let me push back on this characterization of System 1 as purely a liability, because isn't intuition sometimes a literal superpower?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, what about a seasoned firefighter who walks into a burning building and instantly screams to evacuate because they just know the floor will collapse? They can't even articulate why.
Or a chess grandmaster who looks at a board with millions of permutations and just instantly sees the best move.
Right. We definitely don't want the firefighter stopping to do a pros and cons list while the roof is on fire. That System 1 is working perfectly.
That's a crucial nuance. It's a debate Kahneman explores a lot with Gary Klein, a psychologist who studies expert intuition.
And what did they conclude?
They found that intuition absolutely can be a superpower, but only under highly specific, heavily constrained conditions. Klein calls them high-validity environments.
How do we define a high-validity environment?
It requires two things: stable, predictable rules, and rapid, unambiguous feedback. Chess is the ultimate high-validity environment.
Right, the pieces always move the same way, and if you make a bad move, you instantly lose your queen.
Exactly. Firefighting, while chaotic, is governed by highly predictable physical laws of thermodynamics and structural integrity.
So in those environments, with tens of thousands of hours of practice, System 1 absorbs the true physical patterns of reality.
Yes, it becomes a sponge. It recognizes the patterns instantly without conscious thought.
Ah, I see the distinction. So the firefighter System 1 is running a highly accurate algorithm based on physics. But most consequential decisions in our lives aren't in high-validity environments.
Precisely. When you step into a complex, zero-validity environment, which describes almost all of modern white-collar life, the rules change completely.
Like formulating a long-term business strategy or office politics or picking stocks to beat the market.
In those environments, the rules constantly shift, the variables are infinite, and the feedback is massively delayed or just murky.
Did your product launch fail because the strategy was bad, or because a competitor launched on the same day, or because of a global supply chain collapse? You rarely know.
And what makes it so dangerous is that System 1 does not know the difference between a high-validity and a zero-validity environment.
It operates with the exact same supreme confidence. Kahneman describes this flaw with the acronym WISIATI. What you see is all there is.
System 1 will take whatever tiny fragments of incomplete info it has, ignore the vast universe of data it doesn't possess, and just instantly construct a competent narrative.
It connects the dots, even if it only has 2 dots out of a million. And the tired CEO in System 2 just signs off on it. We jump to conclusions and feel incredibly smart doing it.
So if System 1 is desperately scanning the environment for shortcuts to conserve energy, it naturally looks to the external world for immediate cues.
And the most powerful cue it stands for is simply, what gets me rewarded? Which brings us to Charlie Munger and the environmental triggers that crash our autopilot.
Munger calls the dominant trigger the reward and punishment super-response tendency. In behavioral economics, we just call it incentive-caused bias.
Munger famously said he's been in the top 5% of his age cohort his entire life in understanding the terrifying power of incentives, and yet he still continually underestimates them.
Because we fundamentally misunderstand how they work. We think incentives just modify behavior. Like, you pay me more, I work harder.
A conscious trade-off.
Right. But Munger argues that incentives do something way more insidious. They alter your underlying cognition. They warp your literal perception of reality.
He gives these incredible real-world case studies for this. Let's look at the classic Federal Express example.
Oh, this is a great one.
In their early days, FedEx had this massive logistical bottleneck. At their central hub, the night shift workers needed to move millions of packages rapidly from incoming to outgoing planes.
It had to be lightning fast to meet that overnight delivery guarantee.
Exactly. And management tried absolutely everything to speed it up. They pleaded with workers, threatened them with termination, brought in efficiency consultants. Nothing worked. The planes were consistently delayed.
And why? Because they were paying the workers by the hour.
The systemic incentive was perfectly misaligned with the desired outcome. If you're paid by the hour, your biological incentive is to make the work take as long as humanly possible without getting fired.
So they finally recognized the flaw and changed the incentive. They shifted from an hourly wage to paying the workers per shift.
And they told them, as soon as the last plane is loaded, you can go home, and you still get paid for the full night.
And almost overnight, the bottleneck vanished. The workers magically found all these new efficiencies.
Because the problem wasn't a lack of moral character or a poor work ethic, the environment was actively punishing them for being fast.
Munger shares another brilliant corporate example with early Xerox. The sales team was out in the field pushing an older, technically inferior machine on customers,
while actively ignoring the brand new, vastly superior machine the company had just spent millions developing. The CEO was baffled.
Why would salesmen hurt their own company's reputation by selling inferior technology? It made zero logical sense until the CEO looked at the commission structure.
The salesmen were just being paid a higher commission margin to offload the old inventory.
And again, they probably weren't sitting in a smoky room twirling their mustaches, plotting to defraud the customer.
System 1 just looked at the commission sheet, realized the old machine paid for their kids' braces, and magically constructed a narrative where the old machine was actually a better fit for the customer.
But the most terrifying example Munger provides The one that perfectly illustrates how incentives manipulate cognition to the point of absolute delusion is the Omaha surgeon.
This one is so dark. This was a highly respected surgeon in Omaha, Nebraska, who is systematically sending bushel baskets of perfectly normal, healthy gallbladders down to the hospital's pathology lab.
He was performing unnecessary invasive surgeries. By any objective standard, mutilating trusting patients for financial profit.
Now, the immediate reaction of anyone listening is to judge the surgeon as a sociopath. We assume he knew exactly what he was doing and just didn't care about human life.
But Munger's insight goes deeper than just ethical condemnation. He asked a doctor friend who sat on the medical board that removed this surgeon.
He asked, did this guy know he was committing routine medical fraud? Did he know the gallbladders were healthy?
And the friend replied, hell no. He genuinely, deeply believed that the gallbladder was the source of all medical evil in the human body.
This is the exact mechanism of incentive-commed bias. It requires us to understand cognitive dissonance. The surgeon's brain was trapped between two conflicting realities.
On one hand, he took the Hippocratic Oath to do no harm, and his ego demanded he view himself as a healer.
On the other hand, his lifestyle, his mortgage, his status all relied on the massive influx of cash from these surgeries.
And System 1 cannot handle that dissonance. It can't allow the ego to process the thought, I am a butcher who harms people for money. The psychological pain would destroy him.
So, to protect the ego while securing the financial reward, the associative machine just rewrote his medical perception.
It actively altered his diagnostic vision. When he looked at a borderline scan, his motivated reasoning highlighted every tiny anomaly until he genuinely believed surgery was the only moral option.
He was completely blinded to his own malpractice because his brain built a custom reality where financial incentives aligned with moral virtue.
This connects so seamlessly to the macroeconomic insights from Thomas Sowell and Naval Ravikant in our stack.
They argued that as long as we view systemic failures through the lens of individual morality, we'll never solve the actual problems.
So Puomo points out that humans have this terrible habit of falsely explaining complex systemic interactions by searching for individual intentions.
Like when grocery prices suddenly spike in a lower-income neighborhood, the public reaction is to scream greed. They blame the moral failing of the local store owner.
But Sowell, using first principles economics, argues that greed is a constant. It doesn't suddenly increase on a Tuesday to cause a price spike.
To understand it, you have to look at the systemic incentives. Rising supply chain costs, insurance risk premiums in certain zip codes, inflation of wholesale goods.
Blaming a complex economic reality on greed is like a primitive society watching a tree sway in the wind and blaming an invisible forest spirit.
Instead of understanding atmospheric pressure, it's an intellectual shortcut that feels morally satisfying but solves nothing.
Naval echoes this when discussing the principal-agent problem, which he says drives almost all friction in the modern world.
This is a purely structural incentive flaw. It happens when you, the principal, hire an agent like a CEO or a politician to act on your behalf.
But the agent's personal incentives are completely detached from your long-term success.
Let's run a corporate scenario. You're a shareholder. You want the company to survive for 20 years. You hire a CEO.
And the board designs the compensation. So if the stock goes up over the next 4 quarters, the CEO gets a $50 million bonus.
So what happens? The CEO immediately slashes the entire R&D budget. They fire customer service. They halt all infrastructure upgrades.
By cutting all costs, quarterly profits artificially skyrocket. The stock shoots up. The CEO cashes the $50 million check and resigns.
5 years later, the company goes bankrupt because it hasn't developed a new product in half a decade.
And the media writes endless articles about the evil, greedy CEO. But Naval would say, you're completely missing the point.
The CEO behaved exactly as the biological and financial incentives dictated. If you design a system that explicitly rewards short-term destruction, you get short-term destruction.
We have to stop hunting for moral villains and start hunting for systemic incentive flaws.
And as overwhelmingly powerful as financial incentives are, they get exponentially more dangerous when they collide with Parrish's social default,
which Munger categorizes as the social proof tendency, the deeply ingrained evolutionary desire to conform to the herd.
We touched on the Savannah logic earlier, but let's dive into why the fear of standing out is so paralyzing.
For hundreds of thousands of years, being ostracized from your tribe wasn't just emotionally painful, it was a literal death sentence.
If they kicked you out, you starved or got eaten.
So our neurobiology evolved to experience social rejection using the exact same neural pathways that process physical pain. Your brain literally hurts when you disagree with the group.
Munger illustrates the absurdity of this with that classic psychology experiment with the elevator.
Oh, this one is so uncomfortable to watch.
It really is. A completely normal test subject walks into an elevator. Unbeknownst to them, the other 10 people inside are actors employed by the researchers.
The doors close, and all 10 actors silently turn around and face the rear wall. They don't say a word.
And you watch the hidden camera footage of the subject. They are visibly uncomfortable. Their system, too, knows there is no logical reason to face the back of an elevator. The doors are in the front.
But the crushing weight of the social default kicks in. The physical discomfort of being the only non-conforming member is just too much to bear.
And slowly, inevitably, the subject shuffles their feet, turns around, and stares at the back wall with everyone else.
Parrish points out that avoiding this social default requires an immense tolerance for being scorned. He quotes Warren Buffett on this.
What does Buffett say?
He says, "The fact that other people agree or disagree with you makes you neither right nor wrong. You will be right if your facts and reasoning are correct."
It sounds simple, but it's incredibly difficult when the pressure is on. And Munger has a specific term for when you combine massive financial incentives with intense social proof and authority.
Right, when all these defaults align and push the brain in a single extreme direction, he calls it the Lollapalooza effect.
The Lollapalooza tendency. It completely short-circuits rational thought. Munger uses this to explain some of the darkest phenomena in history.
Like the Meldrum experiments, where normal citizens administered what they thought were lethal electrical shocks to strangers. Or the Stanford prison experiment.
These weren't psychopaths. They were ordinary people subjected to a Lollapalooza. Authority bias, social proof, consistency bias, all compounding.
System 1 was completely overwhelmed, and the lazy System 2 just went along for the horrifying ride.
So we've established our biology tricks us before the decision, and our environment warps our reality during the decision. But it doesn't stop there.
Right. What happens after the decision? If the environment tricks us on the front end, our fragile ego is waiting to deceive us on the back end.
And if our brain lies to us about outcomes, how can we ever learn from our experiences? Annie Duke gives us the definitive vocabulary for this. She calls it resulting.
Resulting is a cognitive trap where we evaluate the quality of a decision purely by looking at the outcome, while completely ignoring the process and probabilities that went into the decision itself.
She gives a deeply unsettling example. Imagine a CEO goes to a holiday party, gets completely intoxicated, and decides to drive home.
And by sheer dumb luck, he doesn't encounter any police, doesn't hit anyone, and pulls into his driveway safely.
What does his brain learn from that? Because the outcome was positive, resulting kicks in, his ego bypasses the dangerous, irrational process.
He actually concludes, you know what, I'm highly focused when I've had a few drinks. I actually drive better when I'm drunk. The positive result reinforced a catastrophic process.
And do contrast that with the most famous example of negative resulting in modern sports, Pete Carroll's decision in Super Bowl 49.
Oh, man. The Seahawks on the 1-yard line.
Exactly, 26 seconds left. Everyone assumes Carroll will hand the ball to Marshawn Lynch. Instead, he calls a pass play. The pass is intercepted, and the Seahawks lose the Super Bowl.
And the universal reaction was absolute vitriol, branded the worst play call in football history.
But Duke, using her background as a professional poker player, dissects that narrative. If you look at the parameters before the outcome was known, it was highly defensible.
Mathematically, maybe even the optimal choice. The Seahawks only had one timeout.
Right. If they ran and failed, the clock keeps running, they burn the timeout, and they probably only get one more play.
By choosing to pass, if it's incomplete, the clock stops automatically. It preserves the timeout and gives them 2 more guaranteed attempts.
Plus, the statistical probability of an interception on a short throw in that formation was around 1 or 2%.
The decision was logically sound, maximizing expected value. It just collided with a horrific, low-probability outcome.
But because of resulting, everyone judged the decision as fundamentally idiotic. We can apply this to a much more relatable scenario.
The pothole example.
Yeah, imagine you're driving to a crucial morning meeting. Your map app shows a massive traffic jam and suggests a detour through back roads to save 20 minutes.
So you take the detour, mathematically the correct decision based on available data.
But halfway down, you hit an unmarked massive pothole and blow out your tire. You miss the meeting entirely. What is your reaction?
You're furious. You beat the steering wheel, calling yourself an idiot for taking the back roads.
But why? You couldn't have known the pothole was there. Because the outcome was bad, your brain retroactively decides the process was stupid.
This post-rationalization is heavily driven by Kahneman's hindsight bias. Morgan Housel notes that the human brain cannot tolerate uncertainty.
So in hindsight, the brain reconstructs the past to make the eventual outcome seem like the only possible path.
The illusion of inevitability. We ignore the millions of invisible branches of probability that just didn't materialize.
We judge people harshly for bad outcomes that were probabilistically unavoidable. And Annie Duke adds one final layer to this ego defense mechanism: the self-serving bias.
This is how our brains handle the concept of luck, and it's truly a masterclass in self-deception.
Say we buy a speculative tech stock and it skyrockets. We look in the mirror and say, I am a financial genius. My pure skill caused this.
But when we buy a stock and it goes bankrupt 6 months later, we never say we're an idiot who doesn't understand valuation.
The ego pivots instantly. We say, the market is rigged, the Fed changed interest rates, it was a black swan event.
When we win, it's skill. When we lose, it's terrible luck. The mechanics tie directly back to Munger's inconsistency avoidance tendency.
Right. Dismantling a deeply held belief about yourself requires a massive expenditure of caloric energy. To avoid that painful work, the brain fiercely resists change.
Duke references the social psychologist Fritz Eider. He said humans act as naive scientists.
We selectively gather data, ignore contradictory evidence, and construct hypotheses solely to flatter our pre-existing narrative.
Which leads to the most pervasive illusion in society, the illusion of stock-picking skill. Kahneman shares a profound story about this in his book.
He visited a major Wall Street investment firm and asked the chief investment officer a deceptively simple question.
He asked, when you sell a stock, who exactly buys it? What do the sellers think they know that the buyers don't?
It's devastating because every transaction requires a winner and a loser, yet both enter with supreme confidence.
Kahneman got access to their proprietary data and analyzed the performance records of top wealth advisors over 8 years.
And what did the data show? Did the ones who beat the market year one beat it in year two?
The mathematical correlation between performance from year to year was zero. Literally zero. It was no different than flipping a coin.
Driven completely by systemic variance and luck. Yet these advisors were getting massive bonuses and deeply believed they had rare skill.
Morgan Housel points out, this illusion survives because it's propped up by a powerful, high-status culture. Tailored suits, glass offices, complex jargon.
The environment feeds the ego the narrative of expertise. Plus, the brain is biologically incapable of intuitively grasping compounding probabilities.
We suffer from an illusion of control. We desperately want to believe our personal inputs have a one-to-one correlation with outcomes in complex environments.
Which is mathematically false. So if we step back and look at this diagnostic picture, it's terrifying.
We are navigating zero-validity, modern environments using a primitive autopilot wired for lazy defaults.
Our perception is warped by hidden incentives and social proof. And our ego lies to us about our failures so we never learn from them.
It sounds completely hopeless. A biological prison of irrationality.
But this is where the deep dive turns the corner. The antidote is a fundamental restructuring of how we process reality. Charlie Munger's lattice work of mental models.
Munger argued you cannot truly know anything if you just memorize isolated facts. They must hang together on a lattice work of theory in your head.
He popularized the saying, to the man with only a hammer, every problem looks like a nail.
If you navigate life with only one or two mental models, say you're an economist, so you only see supply and demand, you will violently torture reality to make it fit your limited models.
Munger had a profound disdain for that. He mocked the chiropractor model of medicine, where every issue is suddenly a spinal alignment problem.
Or B.F. Skinner, who was brilliant at behavioral conditioning, but made himself ridiculous trying to explain complex language solely through rats getting food pellets.
So how do we actually build this multidisciplinary lattice work? Naval Ravikant offers brilliant practical advice.
He says you don't need esoteric philosophy, you need to deeply understand the basics: elementary arithmetic, basic geometry, microeconomics.
Naval argues if you can't explain a complex concept to a child using simple words, you don't actually understand it. You're just memorizing jargon to activate the social default.
And once you understand the fundamentals, you need a mechanism to deploy them before System 1 takes over. Naval advocates running your brain in debug mode.
I love this concept. How does debug mode actually work?
It's a form of insight meditation, but the goal is mechanical.
Yeah.
You step back and watch the subroutines of your own mind execute in real time.
Like when that Slack message comes in and you feel the flash of anger, you don't let System 1 take the keyboard.
You just watch the anger. You act as an external observer. You say, my heart rate is elevating. There's the emotion default trying to execute.
By observing it without participating, you literally debug your programming. You sever the link between emotion and reaction, giving the tired CEO in System 2 time to boot up.
That self-awareness takes years of practice. To accelerate it, our sources suggest installing specific, highly tactical models right now.
Let's run a simulation. Say you're deciding whether to quit your comfortable corporate job to start a risky tech startup.
System 1 is paralyzed by the inertia default, terrified of losing the salary. Your ego is dreaming of being Steve Jobs.
How do we make a rational choice? Let's apply model number 1, inversion.
Inversion comes from the mathematician Carl Jacobi, who said, invert, always invert. Munger and Naval are obsessed with this.
The standard way is forward thinking. How do I ensure this succeeds? How do I make $1 million?
But Naval says, I don't believe I have the ability to say what's going to work. Rather, I try to eliminate what's not going to work.
It's a profound shift. The secret isn't about being brilliantly right. It's about consistently avoiding being stupid.
Exactly. So in our simulation, you invert the problem. You ask, if I take this leap, what are the top 5 things that would guarantee my financial ruin and total depression?
You force System 2 to map the nightmare, like cashing out my 401k to fund the prototype, hiding financial stress from my spouse, building a product for a year without asking a single customer if they want it.
Once you identify the exact mechanics of failure, the strategy is simple.
Yeah.
Rigorously avoid doing those 3 things.
That is so powerful. Okay, let's apply model number 2, opportunity cost. Munger notes intelligent people make decisions based on alternatives.
The brain is terrible at seeing what isn't there. When you decide to quit, you focus on the visible transaction, trading a salary for equity.
But opportunity cost forces you to look at the invisible alternative paths you are simultaneously destroying.
Every choice is a sacrifice of another path. The opportunity cost isn't just the salary. It's the fact that for 3 years you'll work 80 hours a week.
It's the time you won't spend reading to your kids, the promotion you would have gotten in year 2, the physical health sacrificed to stress.
If you don't actively calculate the cost of invisible alternatives, you're just being swept along by the emotion default.
And that brings us to the third model from Shane Parrish, designed to defeat the brain's tendency to panic under stress. Both and options.
System 1 hates complexity. It wants a simple binary choice, black or white.
Should I stay in my miserable job forever or burn the boats, quit tomorrow, and risk bankruptcy?
Binary thinking is almost always a dangerous oversimplification that creates artificial blind spots. Parrish says you must forcefully reject the binary. Force a third option. How can I have both?
But wait, let me push back. Isn't both in thinking just a recipe for total burnout? Keeping a 50-hour job and he's starting a company on the side?
That's the trap of how people misunderstand the model.
Yeah.
It's not taking on 2 full-time contradictory commitments. It's a structural risk mitigation tool.
Breaking the all-or-nothing binary?
Yes. If you ask how to have both, System 2 might say, I'll negotiate a 4-day work week with a 20% pay cut. I get a financial floor and 3 days for the startup.
Or transition to an independent consultant, taking just enough client work to cover expenses. You discover a path that removes catastrophic risk.
Okay, so these models are incredible in a vacuum, sitting in a coffee shop with a notebook. But in the heat of the moment, when your boss is screaming,
or cortisol spikes because a client threatens to pull a contract, System 1 seizes control, the models just evaporate. How do we ensure we actually use our lattice work?
this is where we transition to hard mechanics. Parrish is clear. Willpower is not a strategy. You cannot just will yourself to be rational when flooded with adrenaline.
We need structural systems and safeguards that force a physical pause between the emotional trigger and the action. Fire breaks in our own minds.
I love Kahneman's personal safeguard for this. Even as a Nobel laureate who studies this, he admits he falls victim to the social default.
When someone calls him to ask for a speech or favor, the social pressure to say yes in the moment is overwhelming.
So he instituted a hard, unbreakable structural rule. He will never, ever say yes to a proposition on the phone, period.
It's a brilliant hack, removes willpower entirely. His script is, my policy is, I never make commitments on the phone, email me the details.
By using a hard rule, he creates space. The call ends, social pressure dissipates, cortisol drops. The next morning, his System 2 can calculate the opportunity cost.
Another structural safeguard is Parrish's shifting the frame. When you're trapped by W. Weiss IATI, you must force an entirely different frame of reference.
Like Captain Michael Abrashoff taking command of the USS Benfold, Notoriously one of the worst performing ships in the Navy.
Usually, a new commander relies on authority bias, clamps down, enforces stricter rules.
Because their frame of reference is top-down. But Abrashoff recognized that the top-down frame was structurally blind to problems on the deck.
So he shifted the frame. He forced himself to look at every process exclusively through the eyes of the lowest-ranking, youngest sailors.
If I am an 18-year-old seaman, does this process make sense, or is it bureaucratic nonsense?
By shifting his frame, he bypassed his hierarchical blind spots, empowered the crew, and made it the most efficient ship in the Pacific Fleet.
But there's a glaring problem. What if we are so deeply entrenched in our blind spot bias that our ego refuses to let us shift our frame?
Annie Duke points out we are biologically incapable of seeing our own flaws accurately, but we are evolutionary masters at spotting flaws in other people.
Which brings us to the most actionable safeguard, the buddy system, or what Duke calls a truth-seeking pod.
If you can't trust your own brain, outsource the evaluation. Duke suggests forming a pod of 3 people whose explicit charter is accuracy and accountability.
2 people to vigorously debate an issue, and 1 person to act as an objective referee to spot motivated reasoning or ego traps.
This hacks human biology. You take the social default or primitive craving for group approval and weaponize it for your benefit.
Normally, groups reward conformity. A truth-seeking pod explicitly rewards intellectual honesty and changing your mind in the face of new evidence.
It's exactly like the chip system in Alcoholics Anonymous. Think about it. Someone stands up and does something painful for the ego, admits they failed and are powerless.
In normal society, the ego would rather die. But in AA, they get a standing ovation. Massive social approval for honest work.
Duke is saying we need to engineer the exact same dynamic for our cognitive biases. A pod of peers who give a standing ovation when you admit your ego blinded you on a business strategy.
You use social pressure to enforce rationality instead of conformity. And to ensure the pod has accurate data, we implement one final safeguard from Housel and Parrish.
Keeping score, designed to defeat hindsight bias. Parrish argues whenever you make a consequential decision, you must physically write down what you know and expect.
And exactly why you're making the decision at the exact moment you make it. Capture your mindset before the outcome is known.
Because if you don't, your associative machine will seamlessly rewrite history. A decision journal means your ego cannot hide. The truth-seeking pod can hold you accountable to your actual process.
And we combine that written rigor with Housel's ultimate safeguard. Room for error, a margin of safety.
Because no matter how robust your lattice work or your truth-seeking pod, you are still going to be wrong sometimes. The world is highly probabilistic.
Unforeseeable variables exist. You must build financial, emotional, and structural room for error into every major decision. Protect your downside so you aren't wiped out of the game entirely.
So, to synthesize this entire journey for you, the listener, sometime this week you are going to face a complex, high-stakes decision.
Your ancient biology will desperately try to force you into an emotion or ego default. Hidden incentives will try to warp your perception.
Social proof will urge you to agree with the herd, and your ego will attempt to spin a self-serving narrative about the outcome.
The unifying takeaway from Munger, Parrish, Kahneman, and Duke is this. Do not rely on your raw intelligence or your willpower to fight these forces. Willpower is an illusion.
Instead, do the hard work up front. Build your lattice work of fundamental mental models. Practice inversion to avoid catastrophic stupidity.
Relentlessly calculate opportunity costs. Force both and options to break binary thinking. And build structural fire breaks into your life.
Implement hard rules like Kahneman's phone policy. Find your truth-seeking pod. You can't change your fundamental biology, but you can systematically engineer the space to let your rational mind operate.
But as we close this out, I want to pivot and leave you with a final, somewhat provocative philosophical thought to mull over.
Okay, let's hear it.
We have spent this entire deep dive treating our biological instincts, our emotions, our desire to fit in, our ego, as dangerous bugs in our operating system.
Right, patching them, overriding them with logic.
But consider the flip side. If we actually succeed in building a perfect, impenetrable latticework of pure, calculated rationality, do we risk insulating ourselves from the very irrational leaps of faith that are required to create deep human connection, profound art, and radical innovation? When you completely tame the animal mind and subject every impulse to a decision matrix, what exactly is left behind?
Oh, wow. That is a heavy, beautiful question to end on. It forces you to realize the goal isn't to become a robot, but to know when to let the animal mind run and when to put it on a leash. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We will see you next time.